What is it about President Ramaphosa that makes him survive these, what seem like huge, untenable moments?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Of all the politicians who've been caught up in this tension between being social, and I think Ramaphosa has navigated it quite well. The ANC leaders that have emerged from the last conference need to bear in mind that the order of 94 of a capitalist class that co-opted some politicians but retained the structure of the South African economy is no longer going to work.
Let's predict the outcome of ANC politics in 2024.
The EFF has been giving the ANC a good run for their money when it comes to the youth vote. Action SA is in fact left of the DA but right of the ANC and therefore are going to grow. Because the DA has alienated that support base. So they are taking directly from the DA as much as the EFF is taking directly from the ANC.
King David Studio Podcast.
Today I have someone who analyzes what happens in politics. Ongama, Mtimka, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, and you?
Tell me, what got you interested in politics?
That's interesting. So I went to Rhodes to do drama and journalism, because I was interested in film. But what's interesting now with hindsight, that I had to do politics in first year. And then I think it was my second year where I would read a book. And as I read a book, I would feel this strong urge to stop and talk about what I've just read. And so I would speak to no audience, as though I was sharing what's in the book. Now with hindsight, I'm thinking, wow, this thing was burning in my heart. So short answer is destiny and purpose. I collided into it.
It was, intention was very different, it seems.
Yes. I was more clear with journalism and film.
And drama.
But
film as an actor or as a...
I wanted to be an actor and a director.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So we missed out on Ongama's own generations.
Well, you did, but you never know. Maybe later on in my life, that might be something I do. Talking on the subject of New Year resolutions.
Is it still burning though, a little bit?
No, not film per se, but that thing at the back of my mind that said you wanted to do this. So I envisage a Tyler Perry role at some stage once I've made a lot of money. Yeah.
Being someone who analyzes politics in South Africa has become relatively fashionable over the years because we have such a vibrant political scenario, so to speak, in South Africa. And there's yourself and many others. What do you think about the role that people like yourself play in the politics of South Africa?
Sure. So first of all, the reason you're seeing many of us is because it's part of our job. So as an academic, we get measured on what we call academic engagement. To what extent do we take what we do within higher education and take it to the public? The second part of it is that it helps with democratic processes, civic education particularly, and an informed citizenry is able to take decisions that are helping the system, not necessarily voting for certain political parties, but aware enough of what the consequences are when we are lethargic and apathetic, and what the consequences could be when we are applying our minds and are holding politicians accountable.
What would you say? It's not the easiest of questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of South Africans' interest. And South Africans are divided into small groups, I'm aware. But as a general perspective, South Africa's interest in politics.
We need to study this. We need to study it. The declining participation in elections suggests not necessarily being disinterested, but being disillusioned with political institutions in general. Political parties are a major driver of that disillusionment, but we know that disillusionment is not unique only to them. We have seen the Electoral Commission also losing some of its credibility. I mean, the IEC has led elections successfully in South Africa for a long time, but credibility questions have started to be, asked. I'm happy that it still responds fairly well when it comes to scandals that happen during elections. They tend to act swiftly. But in line with the broader suffering of political institutions, if I can put it that way, even the IEC is not unaffected.
Yeah.
But go back to your question on the issue of the interest of South Africans in politics. We tend to disregard the spaces of politicking where we are invited and are formal, but will not think twice about participating in spaces that are created. And where we
example?
So service delivery protests, for example.
Yeah.
So people will not go to a budget consultation meeting of a municipality where ward-based planning is being done. But once they feel enough pressure or there are people who agitate, then they will participate in a service delivery protest.
Okay.
So a budget consultation process is an invited space. A service delivery process is determined by us. So we've seen students do the same thing. We've seen business people employing political tactics. This was the subject of my PhD.
Yeah.
Employing political tactics to get business outcomes. So the so-called construction mafia.
Yes.
Because how you and I get business is we compete fairly, submit quotations, and how these guys that I studied in Gqeberha and how they've been in KZN is they toy to get business and close a project.
So they apply a political method.
Absolutely.
To achieve a commercial means.
Absolutely. So they may not be participating in an election, and increasingly more and more people are less interested in elections, but they are creating sites of politicking.
My analysis, and a very uneducated one, of South Africans and politics is similar to our soccer. And I use soccer/sports in general. We're great fans, but we're very lousy participants.
Absolutely. That's an interesting one. In fact, so it's a very educated analysis.
Yeah.
We've tracked what we call party support. So to what extent are there people who identify with the parties?
Okay.
That's been declining ever since 1999 election. Even as the ANC was growing in terms of voter outcomes, but loyalty was declining with each successive election. So indeed, so that's an established phenomenon within South African political science.
What has caused it? Because we are such a politicized nation. Based on our history, the 1994 elections, which I was old enough to vote, I have a clear memory of them, and so forth. You know, a country with such a strong history of discrimination and so forth, you would expect people to be such strong participants. And I think we were, and we stopped. What has happened?
The conventional wisdom has been that we demobilized in 1994. So one of the pathways to political participation are societies.
Of course.
Civic organizations and all of those things. In 1994, there was almost a feeling that now we've stopped the fight. We've now gotten freedom. We're going to have a responsive state. So there was a demobilization. This is one of the approaches that have been used to explain what's happening in the country. So that's one. But also, there's a sense in which, so I come from a rural area. I've straddled the rural-urban divide.
Yeah.
In the rural areas, we don't relate much with the state.
Okay.
Our roads are not maintained. In fact, roads are the closest we get to public services. And because water and sanitation is not
non-existent. Yeah.
Electricity, we deal directly with ESCOM as opposed to a municipality. What else? Housing is not an issue.
It's a non-existent
you do your own
entity.
housing.
Yes.
Exactly.
Mud house and so forth.
Exactly. So there is little interaction between the citizens and the state. Obviously, crime becomes a big issue because it becomes an issue. but not big because it will mainly be like livestock, but not the kind of crime that you experience in the urban areas. Yeah, because everybody knows, one another. So what I'm hoping is not happening, but the indication that it is in the urban centers is what we call civil society disengagement.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think, citizen disengagement. When people lose so much confidence on state processes that they start living outside the system. The ANC in the discussions policy, was it an NGC or policy conference, conference, had this debate about the lumpen proletariat or the so-called dangerous classes. These are what Stats SA calls neither in employment or education or training. Okay, so South Africa has formalized a study into this group.
Who are these people?
Marx called them the lumpen proletariat. They come, it's the displaced rural people, the people who go to urban centers looking for better opportunities, but most of them also come from it's second, third, fourth generation urban people, townships and the likes. But in the urban centers, they are not able to gain meaningful employment. And so they then resort to dangerous activities or undesirable activities. So Marx would count among them people who have been fired from the army back in the days, people, sex workers, all kinds of things which in capitalist terms are not like meaningful work. And then the tsotsis. So it's no wonder that in South Africa we've seen the rise of cash in transit heists, and because these people still have to put food on the table.
That's true.
And so look at how big they are in South Africa. It's a big number of people, and so they then become the dangerous classes. So any economy that's not accommodating those people, it is a ticking time bomb.
And by not accommodating them, because you call them a class, here they are. If it doesn't accommodate them before they become this person who has become a danger to society, that's where the challenge is, isn't it?
I like that, David, because you know, prompting me to talk about this in relation to the outcomes of the conference in December.
True.
I argued the point that since the early 70s, South Africa became a country in which there was structural unemployment. White people had gone up upper middle class, and there were jobs which were previously reserved for them, which could suddenly not be filled because you had an education system that was designed to exclude black people from. So, and then big business put pressure on the apartheid state to say, relax some of these policies because we now need black people to take these roles. Okay, so the phenomenon of structural unemployment has been apparent since the early 1970s. It's continued. We've just spoken about the dangerous classes, and so you're asking about their accommodation. This is where I argue that we need a new deal. And the ANC leaders that have emerged from the last conference need to bear in mind that the order of 94 of a capitalist class that co-opted some politicians but retained the structure of the South African economy is no longer going to work.
Well, one can easily say to you that it has stayed that way for a very long time.
Sambitere Blanche's argument was that was precisely the game plan of South African capital in the 80s when they started engaging the ANC in exile. To quote him, he says, South African capital realized that if they didn't act proactively, racial capitalism would collapse with apartheid. So they triggered the events that would save racial capitalism and have apartheid collapse without collapsing the entire political economic system. So the point you're making is in fact what Sambiteri Blanche in his book, A History of Inequality in South Africa, calls the game plan of South African capital while they were searching for a new accumulation strategy. So they have had that new accumulation strategy.
However, you can't ignore the racial division within the South African economic setup. It remains the same. You can't ignore pregnancy for too long and pretend it doesn't exist. And that's why we South Africans, whether we like it or not, the divide financially has a lot to do with the racial divide. Am I correct in saying that?
Absolutely. So the ways if you ignore, you say you put your head in the sand, then you need to spend in private security. You need to spend in private services that are expensive.
Yes.
There's a retired chartered accountant called Alan Stride. I hope I get his name right. He says he's the one who set up the revenue service and brought together the customs as well as the revenue side of SARS. He's got a book that's coming up, and he talks about how South Africa has become an abuse economy because you've got an economy where you've got roughly 10 million people who work and everybody else doesn't. So you have a high dependency ratio and cash transfers between those who do and those who don't.
Yeah.
You've got an abused income earner.
It's a permanent black tax.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now that underscores how this system cannot be allowed to continue. It's got a strong racial capitalist aspect, and it's also you and I, we've been able to one way or another survive in a new. That's why, for example, we'd be anxious about an ANC conference, because one grouping in the ANC wants to do things in a disorderly manner that disrupts you and I's ability to exist,
to earn a living.
And earn a living.
Yes.
While another, not necessarily cleaner, but does things in an orderly way so that you and I can continue to live in our small access to the economy while they make billions upon billions.
There is a book, the ANC Billionaires.
Yes.
I guess it speaks to that very point.
Absolutely. And this idea that, and in fact, this has been an issue throughout history, that South Africa has had a small group of elites, first English, and then Afrikaans, and then
and now
wannabe
the the political class.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. So now we've had the politics of the post 1994, where you find that the group, by the way, and it occurred to me recently, last month, by the way, where I talk about shortly before the conference, the lumpen proletariat that took power in 2007. Because quite clearly, there
is a moment.
Indeed. And they brought about this thing of, to hell with these institutions, erode them. Let's run amok and ransack the national fiscus, capture things. The reason why we didn't like that is because of the potential disruption it has on the economic order that somehow works for us, compared, albeit in a small way, compared to the dangerous classes that it didn't work for. And therefore they needed to repurpose those institutions to serve a class that's not educated and in fact is not sensitive to questions of, was it fair?
When you say us, what comes to mind almost immediately when you say to serve us, it's still a very small us.
Yes, absolutely.
Relative to the South African reality, because the small us will continue to struggle to exist if the majority doesn't have a life.
Absolutely. And for black people, it's mainly been those who have gotten above metric and above.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the share of unemployment, you will find that up to about 80-something% of it is people who have some secondary education.
Sure.
If you have above secondary, you are in the 6%. And then of your contribution to unemployment is roughly 6%. And then those with degrees only a 2% of them are not, their share of the unemployed is 2%.
Is smaller.
Compared to this problem of the unemployed graduate that we talk about all the time. But the share of the unemployed among graduates is way smaller compared to their counterparts who have not finished.
Who are lower. Yeah. It's an interesting reality of South Africa when whatever we speak about ultimately comes down to politics of the stomach.
Yes.
It's a title that's used quite often. And now, having heard and seen the ANC conference very recently, you can't help realize, and I'll ask you this because you were a part of it in some small way, you were in the yard. And there's an article that came out that speaks of everyone has been offered money. There's a young man who said that, a 22-year-old who said everyone here has been offered money. What have you picked up about that weird, unexpected, and probably unfair way of ANC politics?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's I in a conversation with my colleagues, I was saying it's time that we talk about the political economy of succession politics in the ANC.
Yeah.
Because it's an entire political economy. Political in the sense that it's part of a political decision-making process. Economy in the sense that there's a trading that happens with votes and all of those things. I know they say it was Nasrec won.
Yes.
Nasrec won in my view was the first time you had a professionalized transacting approach to dispensing these monies.
Okay.
Otherwise, these rumors of monies go as far back as Polokwane, where people were saying monies were being exchanged.
Yeah.
So in an economy that we've just described, where it doesn't work for many people, all of a sudden, to be able to bring about numbers positions you economically well.
Yeah.
Because many people earn money in between conferences and they're set.
Yes. And remember, if you read through Digital Vibes scandals, it looks like money was raised to contest in the political space that just recently happened at Nasrec.
Yeah, and also the allegations that were made at the State Capture Commission about state security agency funds that were used to finance one of the candidates' campaigns in 2017. So it's been done, and it's in municipalities. Likewise, because that's another mess that we don't look at and consider.
It's a very
local
big mess
government.
there. Yeah,
absolutely. Look at the public the
Auditor General.
Yes, thank you. Auditor General's reports.
It's largely to do with municipalities.
Yeah, and much to have frustration, they don't act on the reports because it's the politicians, again, that's another political economy, local government, where monies get swindled deliberately with networks of politicians and officials.
Yeah.
And it's a repurposing of budgets and institutions, and that's it. People are swindling money from the system.
Sure. Do you know when you say it that way, and it's a common question I ask in the studio, we seem to have gone too far with this. As Professor William Gumete describes it, a parallel system.
Yes.
We seem to have gone too far with the parallel system. If you've been smoking for 20 years and you've been asked to stop because it's going to kill you, I imagine, and I've never smoked, I imagine it's not an easy decision to make.
Yeah.
So it seems like we've gone that far and our lungs are almost about to collapse.
Absolutely. So I was watching a documentary recently on Mexico and how the cartels there have entrenched themselves in the politics, in the police, in every sphere of society, in the judiciary.
Yeah.
And I got chills because the culmination of what's happening in South Africa, if not stopped, is exactly that state of affairs where everything is run by the cartels. And in many ways, there are cartels that run South Africa. And in fact, that's why I wrote a piece last month that talks to varieties of capture a few days before the conference. Varieties of capture. How one grouping captures this capture that we're talking about.
That we've seen.
Blah, blah, blah. And then another group which is more the well-educated group that is smart not to disrupt our lives while they capture and benefit from billions of wealth, they do things in a more smart way. But it's capture regardless. By the way, you mentioned parallel institutions. This is not unique to South Africa. Even developed countries experience this. We borrowed the theory and the language of state capture and the deep state from the US. It's in the US where allegations of vote buying, not ANC conference or Congress or Democrats or Republican conference vote buying. No, congressmen and women vote buying.
Wow.
So
lower level even.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what Busasa is alleged to have done with MPs, that's what has been alleged in the US. Because remember, there you have CR17 more times pay each candidate that sits in the Congress, because each person runs their own
state.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's a problem of political institutions.
Is it a problem of democracy? Because democracy is not perfect. Democracy by its nature, it's very loud, but it delivers very slowly. And because it needs votes, it needs numbers, you are likely to find yourself having to buy the votes if you're desperate.
Absolutely. Because to run a campaign, you need money. And there are people to give money. They want something
in return.
And so the tension that is there for representatives is, once I become a representative, to what extent do I commit to my constituency, and to what extent do I commit to my funders? There's the electoral bill public commentary is ending.
Yeah,
this thing we have that once we go to a constituency-based system, we are going to solve our problems with representatives that act in bad faith, is not proved in a country like the US, which is a textbook case of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's always a contestation for the priorities and the loyalty of the representatives once they win elections. So I'm going back to your point, David, sorry, that it's a problem of democracy.
That's it, yes. And a problem that I know with dictators will say, I don't have that problem because I don't have to ask anybody to do anything.
Indeed, except that dictators also steal, and the issue with them is that you're never going to hear about it.
That's true.
There are benevolent dictators as well. And this is what's alleged about Muammar Gaddafi.
For example.
That he was a benevolent dictator and looked after his people, except that they didn't need to ask questions like, how much are you taking compared to what you're giving us? So that's why in all our critique of democracy and all of its weaknesses, we would say, maybe a dictatorship is not democracy with all its weaknesses is good, but China is challenging the model.
That's true.
Because I think one of the Chinese professors makes the point that it's impossible in China to elect a foolish person or a person of no accomplishment to make it into Communist Party senior roles.
Okay.
Because there, it's merit. So, in fact, this professor was making the point, you could never have a Donald Trump.
Okay.
You could never have a Jacob Zuma.
Yeah.
Excuse me to his fans.
Yes.
Because even though it's a one-party state, it's based on merit. You can never go run a province. In fact, it's unthinkable to go up contest a province
if you don't have
a record of having managed a municipality well.
Whoa.
Now, talk about so in China, it's one party. You can't have another contesting party. So that's not democratic.
Yeah.
But its outcomes have been good outcomes as far as the competency of the bureaucrats.
Yeah. The ANC speaks of eye of the needle. It speaks of all sorts of processes that you can't just be. You have to qualify to be. It's something that they started implementing now when they're talking about you have to have certain education and so forth and so forth. Again, I asked, are we too late as the ANC? And I use us as a black community, are we too late to think of those things as important? And if we're not, is this train still savable?
Great. So what's interesting is that in democracies, even though at the beginning people look at the democracy in terms of what does it bring in terms of the changes in our lives, and the democracy itself has no value besides whether or not our lives are changing.
That's it.
However, as lives change, electricity is provided, water and sanitation, people over time become interested in democracy for its sake.
Okay.
That's when those demands get placed. So these demands, at the time the ANC was rolling out upgrading of informal settlements and townships.
houses.
Exactly.
And all of that, yes.
and electricity and water and all of those things. Those questions could not be asked. But now that those things have been, the thinking among South Africans gets to be, how do we protect what we have? And then begin to place demands on more accountability and democracy for its sake.
Let's go back to the conference that took place in December. An interesting episode within the ANC. It's probably one of the most, every time we have a conference, a national conference, ANC, it's called a decisive, a big one, an important one, and so forth. What stood out more about this one for you?
What stood out for me about this one is that you had a situation in which a person who was trusted also was embroiled in a scandal. And for the first time in the history of his opponents' attempts to get him embroiled in a scandal, they had found something that could potentially stick to such an extent that there was the parliamentary process. But interestingly, he had done significant reform work at the level of the party and the state, to such an extent that the unthinkable had happened.
Yeah,
the most powerful politician in the ANC, the Secretary General, was fired on account of this renewal.
Yeah.
So
you're referring to ACE.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you had a situation where there has been genuine renewal to the extent that politicians have lost their jobs on questions of morality and ethics and the law.
That's it, yeah.
Okay. But the contest that was coming was from among a group known to be avowed anti-constitutionalists.
They don't care.
Yes.
Basically.
And to me, the source of anxiety was to be caught between this rock and a hard place. That you have a president who should be held accountable. But you know that those calling for his accountability desire a situation in which there's unfettered political power, and the more of what they are saying the president must be held accountable for is what is the kind of society they envisage.
They want to create.
Yes. So
wow.
To answer your question, that's what was at stake for me.
When we go back to it, the president survived 2 or 3 warning shots, if we want to call that, in December. The parliamentary process, with, what is it, Section 889 ruling, so to speak, and he keeps surviving them. What is it about President Ramaphosa that makes him survive these, what seem like huge, untenable moments?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So when I was speaking earlier in the year to various groups that are interested in the political outlook of the country, I would say, one, you had Integrity Commission, you had the Electoral Committee after it announced its rules, and then you had Parliament. So those were all seismic events. The Integrity Committee didn't really officially make a finding against the president. So he survived that. Yeah. And then secondly, you had the Electoral Committee. The Electoral Committee was empowered based on the rules that, were approved to disqualify both presidential candidates.
That's true.
And then once he had survived those, you then had the parliament.
Parliamentary process.
What I think is an answer to your question about how he has survived.
And he continues to survive.
Is the fact that he was dominant in the NEC from about year 2 of the 5
of his presidency,
of this party presidents.
Yeah.
And then the policy conference.
Yeah.
Because people went there to scrap the step aside
that's
rule.
true.
And they were defeated.
Yeah.
And then also when it came to parliament, I thought that all that they were trying to do was to make sure that they don't create a problem at the level of the state.
Okay.
About 2 weeks before the conference. In fact, it was a week because it was postponed a week before the conference.
Yeah.
So the president survived because of his political power within the ANC, but also because of some practical considerations around where, look, recently, since the history of removing presidents in the ANC, there has been better party-based processes of changing a president.
Okay. For example?
The chances are in parliament.
Okay.
Mbeki, for example, there's no such a thing as a recall in the South African constitution, but a recall could remove Mbeki quicker than a parliamentary process.
Yeah. It was the same with Zuma.
Yeah. And up to 9 times, the 9 lives of Jacob Zuma. Up to 9 times until there was an opportune party-based process to remove him.
Yeah.
And indeed he was removed.
Worked, yes.
Okay. So even now I want President Cyril Ramaphosa to be held accountable. I wanted also even back in December, I was of the view that it was foolish to precipitate a state-level crisis so close to an ANC conference when you could have an outcome that could reverse that very same decision.
That's true.
Through an instruction to the party lieutenant, because you would have had
Which
a
is what
new
happened.
NEC.
Essentially.
Yeah. So I think he's survived because of his dominant position within the party. He's emboldened now even more, now that he's no longer saddled with a
conference, and a conference that's
a conference, and also an NEC and top 6 that's split right in the middle.
Is this top 7, as it's called
top
now?
7, thank you.
Is it one that works in his favor, so to speak?
Very much. Yeah. I thought that this is a consolidation. Paul is quite aware going forward about how close he is to the throne or to Mahlaba Ndlovu.
Closer than he's ever been.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I doubt he's the kind of politician that's going to be clumsy. I do get chills thinking about him and his power. But I think the strategic aspect of him will make him continue to be a strong backer and an enforcer, in fact, of Ramaphosa and whatever agenda they want to drive, more than a threat. And I think that he will start being a threat when it no longer matters to Ramaphosa.
Yes, when it's...
Yeah, unless maybe these scandals, become a lot more, maybe there's some explosive information that comes out from the investigations that are taking place, then he might play his hand. And we saw shortly before the conference,
just before, there was
him playing his hand, upsetting the CR faction. In fact, he succeeded despite the fact that they didn't want him in his slate.
It's an interesting one. Gweda's role in Cyril Ramaphosa's camp, I've never known him to be in his camp, but it seems like he is. I remember when the former president was walking in and people started singing while the president was delivering his speech. There's audio that comes out through the mic where he says to the president, "Bayeke, bacule, baqede." Like you could tell that he's saying, "Look." Almost like someone saying, "Don't worry about this."
Yes. Look, Gwede is the person Minister Matasha.
Yes, well,
no,
as a unionist, he would be like, Gwede is good enough.
Sure. He's the person you take to war.
Yeah.
He's going to fight your war. Jacob Zuma, wherever he is, former President Jacob Zuma, wherever he is, he will respect Gwede Mantashe because those surviving in those 9
lives,
no motion,
motion of
it
no
was
confidence.
Gwede who had to go and speak to the ANC caucus.
Yeah.
So he's an enforcer. By the way, I thought that enforcer role, Fikile Mbalula is a natural successor of it. And so he plays it. Paul plays it, but not in such a a bulldog type of approach, but he plays it smoothly as well. Paul is quite a power player.
Yeah.
So the president, I'm saying, has got a number of enforcers, and they have strengthened the Secretary General's office through the first and second deputy Secretary Generals. I think that they've got a machine that can work.
Do they have the right people in the first and second roles?
I'm quite happy about the people. Look, Nomvula Mukunyane is facing a scandal.
Yeah, which one is that?
The Busasa and the Zondo Commission.
The water.
That's an explosive one as well.
Department of Water Affairs.
But she's not the type of person who's going to be deliberately pursuing a frontal attack against the president.
Okay. What type is she then in that regard?
I would put her among the group of politicians that are going to be enforcers.
Yeah.
So the president shouldn't be worried about her, at least for now, because those are she can do political management.
We've seen her.
She's very popular. She can manage things. She can organize a lot.
Yeah.
So she's definitely an asset, save for the questions that linger. But though that's also true about the president himself.
Yeah. Do you know something that comes out a lot about politics of the ANC is the tribal feel to conferences, particularly this time when it even Limpopo guys say we're taking entry to KZN. There was a lot of that type of stuff. Does that exist really?
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate that the ANC politicians exploit. By the way, it's the elite within the ANC that exploit this in order to secure role.
And was this an opportunity for ANC to have female representation or youth representation?
Sure. So the female representation is at least 3 of the top.
Top 7
of the top 7. And
it's higher than it's ever been before.
It is, and Marupini Ramokgopa is a 1980s politician.
Okay.
So you would have had Ronald Lamola. If things were up to me, you would have had Ronald Lamola and Marupini, both 80s generation, and therefore politics born out of the new realities.
That's it.
Because if you look across the political spectrum, that's who is in the EFF and in the groups that are coming up now,
even DA,
Busa, the DA, Busa, Rise now,
that's
the new kid in the block. Yeah. So that's what's happening across the political spectrum. And the ANC, the EFF has been giving the ANC a good run for their money when it comes to the youth vote. Student command as well, it's so it's a missed opportunity. But I think that President Cyril Ramaphosa, armed with this kind of political power that he has, he will be able, he should position, in fact, a group of targeted young people in the cabinet. We're talking Lamola because Ronald Lamola was in the NEC and also, in
Minister,
cabinet. And that helps with profiling. That's what Boris Yeltsin did for Vladimir Putin in the 1999, in the eve of 2000. Ahead of the 2000 election, and Vladimir Putin overtook a leading candidate by December 1999 when the elections came in August 2000.
He was leading
precisely because Boris Yeltsin had resigned and made him acting president, and therefore made him to be well ahead.
Profiled him better.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I hope that this group of ANC politicians are going to be that strategic.
Yeah.
They've been given a young NEC as well. You've got a lot of, young people in that NEC. So I hope that these changes are going to happen and help the ANC to be able to rebuild.
Is the Phala behind us or behind Ramaphosa?
It's not. If you look at all the reports that are taking place now, I hope they don't attempt to do something as clumsy as what Jacob Zuma did during his time, where you compromise the ability of institutions to function independently by deploying people who are loyalists,
who will sit on the reports and do
sit
nothing.
and do nothing.
Yeah.
We cannot afford to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, even the ANC himself or President Cyril Ramaphosa, for his legacy, cannot afford to do something like that.
So he still faces dealing with it at some point. He can't pretend because he survived Parliament, a report, he can't pretend this is gone away.
Indeed. And also, should things go to Parliament again, I can bet that the number of ANC politicians prepared to vote with the opposition might just be higher.
Why would that be the case?
Than was the case shortly close to the conference. Because many of the politicians might have had hope that they were going to deal with him at the conference in December, compared to in January when there's no upcoming big party event that gives them that opportunity.
There was a charge against those that said yes. Is the charge still applicable? Because I saw reports saying that maybe not.
Yeah, there were agitations that after January 8, these people are going to be dealt with. So
maybe it's still coming.
Yeah.
Another point with regards to Ramaphosa's politics. What is Ramaphosa's politics, or what are Ramaphosa? Because I don't quite understand them. I don't know where to put him. Zuma's politics were pretty clear. You know, you could almost say I can write a one-pager, but I'm not sure about Ramaphosa's politics in that regard.
So that lies in the crux of this article I wrote and was published last month.
Yeah.
You know, just a few days before the conference. That there are two broad arrangements politically. There's the Order of 94.
Okay.
And there's the Order of 2007.
Okay.
For COSATU would say, no, actually, it's the class project of 96.
Jeez.
I think, no, it's actually the Order of 94. Why? Because, as we said earlier, there was a consensus with the business class to make this kind of democracy, some Peter Blanche call it the liberal capitalist democracy that we have, as opposed to a social democratic.
Yes.
Obviously, there are versions of both,
True.
But generally, the liberalist capitalist version, in my view,
plays out more.
Ramaphosa's politics.
That's it, yeah.
The politics of the state can play a role in the economy, but the private sector is the main actor.
Yeah.
The politics of let's get things done orderly and have a constitution, a constitutional democracy with libertarian principles. So it's centrist politics in essence.
Yes.
That's why he was being decampaigned as closer to the DA,
Yes.
and the EF and the RET closer to the EFF.
Yeah.
That's his politics. It's the current order. The alternative to his politics has been what, in my view, has been embodied by a lumpen proletariat kind of group that seeks to it covers its rhetoric in socialist rhetoric.
Of course, that's why it's economic empowerment.
Absolutely.
Of the masses.
But the true underlying politics of the group is leveraging the state for resources of the state, whereas the Ramaphosa faction seems to me as leveraging the state for deals with the private sector.
Okay. All right. Which is what you find in the US, for example, where the politics is not about money inside the state, but money from outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The influence that you can have over leadership within the politics.
Yes. That's the version.
Yeah. And is he playing it out properly? Because he still has a socialist reality that he has to deal with, poor South Africans that need everyday basic stuff.
Yeah, of all the politicians who've been caught up in this tension between being social, and I think Ramaphosa has navigated it quite well, both in rhetoric and some people would argue less so in reality, but I think also he's tried. So, for example, he was careful leading to Nasrec 1, not to frame himself anti-RET.
Of course.
So there was RET, and his was REST, radical socioeconomic, transformation. On the land debate, he was not on its opposite. And on the Reserve Bank, he was tagging along.
Yes, with the rhetoric that spoke of nationalizing the Reserve Bank.
So he's played the game.
Yeah.
Even though he's tended to act center or center-right, or sometimes center-left, to the extent that people are calling the 350 Ramaphosa, according to Minister Kodongwana.
It's an interesting one because when you're playing such politics, it's tricky to make everyone happy. That's just the reality of it. But the question is, do you, in the long run, survive? Because the masses are the ones that vote in 2024. Not your business friends. And what is your prediction of the survival of such politics in 2024?
I believe the policy continuum that parties in South Africa will survive in is somewhere between center-left and center.
Okay. Not radical right.
And some center-right.
Yeah.
Depending on what we call business cycles. There are times when you need contraction in spending.
Of course.
There are times when you need to be expansionary. Yeah. So good situational leadership means being able to judge those times as they come. There's no other party that can, and in fact, history shows us all the parties on the far right or far left haven't become what we call short-lived parties, or they are permanently small, which is why even the EFF is battling growing beyond,
what 10, they are 12%. Exactly. Yeah.
That's because their policy platforms are on the extreme left. Yeah. Some people think that their approach to citizenship is in fact a right-wing approach, even if the policy platform from an economic point of view is
very left. Is very left.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, what are their prospects, EFF, in terms of growth?
I think
they would have to change their narrative, I guess.
I think that with their current platform, they might continue to grow, but in a very small way. And I think that they are going to face new kids on the block that may appeal to the black middle class because of decency, and I use that in inverted commas, decorum. So, for example, I would expect Musi Maimane to be able to secure a seat or two through Busa in Parliament. Action SA, definitely. Action SA is in fact left of the DA but right of the ANC, and therefore are going to grow. Because the DA has alienated that support base. So they are taking directly from the DA as much as the EFF is taking directly from the ANC.
In early December, there was conversation about the Action SA and DA forming a working relation. I remember even, what's his name, Mashaba, former mayor of Johannesburg, said, let bygones be bygones, which is unexpected because he was a guy who said, those people, they are bad, and they gave me a raw deal. Do you see this partnership continuing? And what impact will it have on a loyal Action SA voter, for that matter?
I think that the approach of the DA to coalition formation and sustainability does need a different. The DA does need a different approach when it comes to it. Helen Zille emerged at a time when coalition was swallowing the smaller one.
Yes, that's what it meant.
Indeed,
yeah.
The independent Democrats, and we know how that
didn't end well.
10 years later, you know. So smaller parties, I think, will be a lot more careful about that. But the DA seems to be a lot more stark in its approach, and so one expects that relationship is going to be a frenemies type of relationship. Sometimes we're good, we like each other, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, we see a slab about each other behind the scenes.
Yes.
What do you anticipate with regards to the outcome of the ANC conference when it comes to cabinet? Are we likely to see a cabinet reshuffle, largely because of the squabbles building up to conference, Sisulu, Lamini Zuma, and so forth? What do we anticipate?
I hope that if it comes, it's not just dealing with the,
with the grudge,
but also with the deadwood.
Okay.
Look, we've come to a time where dealing with the grudge could be what's needed to trigger the final exodus of the stale, the people that are counterbalancing the process of renewal.
Okay.
Because the factions are bigger than the ANC. So you need to simplify that. The conference has sort of tried. Now, obviously, Parliament still needs to
change
change in line with the new NEC and also the cabinet. But what we may find is that also because people have lost power at the level of the party, that they become suddenly more pliable to collaborating with or to working with the new leadership at the party level.
But it would seem obvious why they're doing it. And as a sitting president, you'll say, well, when I needed you were not around. Why would I want to keep working with you?
That's where your theory then comes in of is it a vindictive approach?
Yes, or not?
Is it an approach that deals with the deadlock and only enough to deal with the deadlock, but keep one or two who may be good, who come from an opposing faction. I don't know who those could be.
That's the thing
at this stage,
yes.
But I think it's the principle that matters.
But the possibility of a reshuffle, it's staring at us.
It's there. There are allies that have backed President Cyril Ramaphosa from the provinces. The Jomo Sibiyas who've brought
numbers
from KZN,
yes.
And he may need to do something about those people because they are sidelined at the level of the province.
Yes.
And so there'll be pressure on him to create something for them.
And Limpopo, that changed its mind close to the day before. I don't know what happened. Everybody wonders when they spoke about N3, was it money or was it promises? And I remember, I forgot which lady was being interviewed. And he said, well, it's time for change.
Sure. I think both of them with KZN were playing their hands too much.
Yeah.
And that's the elites in the provinces and not the rank and file membership. And in fact, the results show that the elites didn't go with all of their members.
That's true.
And I hope this is a lesson that leaders, not just in KZN and Limpopo learn, but across the board.
You know, when you look at ANC politics, you can't help acknowledge where we come from your Ace Magashule of this world, from the Supra of this world, and David Mabuza, where we used to speak of the Premier League. It seems like times have changed. It almost sounds like we're talking of 100 years ago, because in politics, things move so quickly.
Well,
where are they now in the story?
By the way, so without talking about those particular warm bodies,
yes.
Interestingly, Panyaza Lesufi acknowledged the role of a super Premier League because during the conference, they formalized discussions among the chairpersons of the provinces to try and broker some deals ahead of the elections.
Wow.
And then obviously there was the branch-based process. So it seems to me that the creation of rules by Kgalema for people to campaign freely allowed a structure that operated clandestinely leading up to Nasrec One, the Premier League, to become a sort of acceptable structure for negotiations. That was quite interesting. I thought that the ANC was changing from the archaic clandestine approach. So we may not have had the Supras in them,
but we still have the similar
chairpersons who were premiers, some of them, who were mindful of the power that they had and were attempting to broker deals among each other.
Yeah.
But some of them over-assumed their power.
The results of the presidency of the ANC was much closer than the nominations. What could have been the case there? Because the nominations, it was almost like a 4-0 victory for the president. Sure. But it came out looking much, much closer.
I think it was the horse trading. We cannot also underestimate the role of Jacob Zuma in the Mkhize camp. Because remember how KZN had settled on Mkhize included some conflict between the PEC
province
and
itself.
Jacob Zuma.
Yes.
Because Jacob Zuma was attempting to impose Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and KZN were at least mindful of how that would be a strategic blunder and insisted on Zweli Mkhize. Yes. But in the conference floor, they had a meeting apparently and consolidated, which is why Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma declined nomination.
Yes.
And I think that would partly explain the numbers, and also Sisulu declining nomination.
So that made some numbers available as well.
I think so.
Now, the interesting thing for me about Zuma, it makes one think of Brazilian politics, with Lula, who's still active in politics, became president again. You sit back and wonder how a former ANC leader, we don't see them as active as Zuma has become, even if he doesn't stand in front of the cameras a lot, but you can feel his presence in the system.
Yes. And I think that he over-assumed his power.
Yeah.
I hope that he wasn't inspired by Lula's popularity
rebirth. Yes.
And his grand entrance while the president was delivering a report suggests that he thought his power was bigger than it was.
Yeah.
I think that he is a powerful politician, but KZN was clear that they needed a new trajectory in terms of, in order for them to consolidate their position.
Yeah.
So I think that he may be history as far as KZN politics are concerned going forward.
Yeah.
And they are going to need a new rallying point. And I hope that they are able on other political factors than this thing that threatens ethnic mobilization.
That's true.
They can be able to find. I think one of the people was talking about how they contribute to the national share of the votes of the ANC. I hope that becomes a platform with which they negotiate and are politicking, as opposed to what's in it for us as KZN,
Yeah. ANC politics always speaks of what's in it for us type of politics.
Yes.
And which is probably why there's always rumors of money for votes and things like that. Is what I give you this and you give me that. Has the ANC done well? And maybe I have the answer to that question when it comes to deploying people to key positions in government.
Maybe let's hear your answer first.
I don't think they have. Because the results are so bad.
They deploy deadwood to government. And I think that that's a problem. Because if they were deploying people who are competent, I doubt that we would have such low levels of performance.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the whole process of leadership selection and securing office in the ANC depends a lot on power brokering and not on a humble presentation of an ask to delegates.
True.
And have them factor a few things to decide whether they should vote you or not.
Yeah.
And because those mass-based processes are subject to elite control, you are never going to have a performing state up until you get to a period where these leaders must go and present vulnerable to voters and make an ask for them to vote for them. And when they are forced to do that, they are going to have to be forced to say, "Wenzeni, chief?
Yes,
what did you do?"
Yes.
You know, as long as they can feel, I can negotiate with a regional broker and a branch broker somewhere there,
I'm good enough.
then performance becomes inconsequential.
However, when we look at your history, it becomes the reason why you lose votes in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know why? Because ANC voters are not the same as ANC members.
That's true.
ANC members are the ones among whom these deals get made. Voters don't care. Remember when we talk about how party loyalty has been declining, even at a time when the ANC was increasing its share of the votes to 2/3 in 2004. So if you are increasing at a time when people are less likely to be loyal to a party, you must know that that's borrowed time.
Yeah. Because, one can easily say events of the conference in Nasrec was much ado about nothing. Because in the long run, and very short long run, meaning the next election, it's the people that vote.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes.
Let's assume for a second that Zweli Mkhize won the Nasrec. Because there was a lot of narrative that said, well, that will be the first ANC president to not be state president. Those were some of the conversations that were happening. Essentially saying, well, they must do what they want in Nasrec. We will decide who becomes president in the next elections.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, it's an important consideration.
Yeah.
That's why the ANC over time has become increasingly sensitive to the public gaze.
Are they sensitive?
Than they had. No, they are. Well, they would not have been if they had, after all these things they have done, they elect people who have got some, things to answer.
Yeah.
But in some ways, they have been sensitive to the public gaze. In other ways, the overbearing nature of the power brokering has made them put their head in the sand. Otherwise, both President Cyril Ramaphosa, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, Gwede Mantashe, Nomvula Mokonyane would not have made it to the top 7.
It's an interesting one. Now let's predict the outcome of ANC politics in 2024. Is it still a probability of ANC winning elections?
I don't think so. I think the best that President Cyril Ramaphosa can do is to slow down the rate at which the party is losing the share of the vote, rather than reverse it to growth.
Okay,
that's my view. The reason is that the reality of people's experience with the ANC is not just national. The withdrawal of metropolitan municipality support is based on people's lived experiences in the metros.
That's true.
So whatever changes happen at a national level that have got good PR and political mileage, that cannot dispute people's experience. In Makhanda, for example, we have to drive through potholes, East London, Gqeberha,
Fitzbek,
Sandton.
I'm
driving in Sandton and I see potholes and paved roads with lots of patches that are unpaved.
R21 traveling from Pretoria to the airport is patched. Funny.
Yes. So you see, people that you can't spin that experience.
Yeah. Even if your political narrative makes sense, you can't spin it. He's been regarded, and whether right or wrong, as an indecisive president. At least in the eyes of those who observe him, he's been said to be one that takes too long to make clear, simple decisions.
Sure.
ESCOM being one such example.
Sure. I think President Ramaphosa is the kind of person who would rather lose a transaction than lose a person.
Okay, explain that.
Instead of him reading the Riot Act on a person and strain a relationship, he would rather face the consequences of whatever is the problem than lose the relationship.
He won't break up. If it was a girlfriend, he won't break up. He will try to keep the relationship going.
I think so.
Even if it's strained.
Indeed. And I think it's a stretch for him to have to, confront a situation and do things. But
that surely is a weakness.
It is. But I think that the political environment of post-Nasrec 2 is going to make it easier for him than the political environment of Nasrec 1.
Because Nasrec 1 was too close. The ANC was split almost half.
Yes.
So it was not easy.
Yeah.
So this time around, he walks in with a few more bullets in his gun than he did before.
And these guys are enforcers that are strongly in his camp.
Absolutely.
Until maybe towards 2027 now.
Yeah.
Where we will start seeing signs of rebellion. In fact, in ANC politics, that will be 2 years before 2027.
That's the thing.
So that will be 2025. That will be after the elections, when we start seeing self-interest among some of his players in the top 7.
We predicted the ANC politics, but let's predict the South African politics as a whole. 2024. What happens there?
I've been calling it a process of dynamic fragmentation. In terms of which you are having the dominant party declining.
Okay.
And you are having the small parties as a phenomenon continue to happen even as particular small parties leave the system.
Okay. Leave the system almost naturally.
Yeah. They're not getting votes. They used to be popular. Now they're not.
Cope.
The AIC cope.
Yes.
Because remember, there's been this debate in political studies of, do we call them short-lived parties or do we call them small parties? Because short-lived parties don't last many elections because they are formed as splinters of the dominant party.
That's true.
And over time, the anger that precipitated their rise wanes.
Yes. Or the enemy disappears.
Exactly.
Yes.
And they start fighting among each other.
That's it.
So there's all those dynamics. So our politics will mirror the UK, where, you've got there's a lot of small parties that contribute to constituting a government. And I suspect that what it will crystallize into will become clearer in the 2030s as to whether that multi-party democracy becomes permanent or these negotiations you are referring to between Action SA and the DA and maybe
EFF
BUSA, because it's closer to those things.
That's true.
So in fact, you may find that if there's a splinter RET, there's an opportunity to join forces with the EFF. And it may be that this culminates in a two-party state in the 2030s, or we have a permanent multi-party democracy.
Multi-party democracy is something that so far we are familiar with. It's new, but we kind of have a sense of it because of what's happening in the local government level. It's extremely disruptive to service delivery. We know that. We saw what happened in Ekurhuleni, where there was no mayor for a while. And I can give you many examples of it. Surely that's a very disruptive to everyday living of South Africans.
Yes, and we hope that over time we our politicians gain the experience of managing political relationships. Even though, for example, John Steenhuisen and Herman Mashaba, who met recently, both of those politicians are not the entire DA and Action SA.
True.
But it's good when they start talking, because they relearn how the other one thinks, and therefore relationships build and political management becomes easier. That's our only solution. Parties learning to manage politically well. And this is why, again, I was also arguing this point about the generational shift. A Ronald Lamola, to me, would most likely negotiate with a Julius Malema and maybe
who's the mayor of Cape Town?
Yes, Gwendolyn Lewis.
Exactly.
And that cohort of because their experience of race is different.
Very.
Their sensitivities to Mpimpi, it's not the same. Because what Mpimpi means, when you say it to President Cyril Ramaphosa, you really are swearing at him.
Absolutely.
When you choose a Roland Lamola of Mpimpi who does not have the conceptual framework of the 70s and 80s, it's a meaningless thing, So
it's not a lived experience.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't trigger, deep-seated emotions. So these guys can sort of find one another a lot
more. Even Musi, for that matter, in that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the point I'm making, that if Helen makes way, Bosi R and them make way, you have a more potential for forming inter-party workable relationships.
Your analysis almost immediately gives the impression that these old toppies are delaying progress.
They're blocking. Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better.
Yes, they are slowing down where the country could possibly go.
Yeah, because they've got those notions of, I don't back down. I was there in the struggle. Who are you to want to be president? Yeah. I deserve it because I sacrificed. I spent many years away from my family.
Yeah. All of that.
Yeah.
And that's a burden that largely is carried by the ANC.
Yeah. No, it is. And
it naturally seems quite unfortunate that burden is the reason why a lot of things are probably not happening.
Yes. Yes, because you see, notions of seniority, for example, are determined by that, and therefore allocations, you were talking about deployment earlier, allocations of roles and responsibilities are strongly influenced by these values of this generation, which are drawn out of realities that we're no longer confronting.
But Cyril Ramaphosa's politics, historically, are not strong struggle politics.
Yes.
They are more union politics.
Yes.
Correct me if my...
Yes, and that's been the source of his decampaigning by
those who are saying, but this guy wasn't with us.
ANC, even though he's been SG since he was SG in 1991.
But what
ANC. So it's a permanent thing
that he carries with him. Yeah. Even if I guess there's those who decide to ignore his credentials. That's why they will bring that as a subject matter.
Yes.
Let's as we conclude, South Africa 2030 or 2024, is it a South Africa that has regained its traction economically, that has regained its traction service delivery-wise, or where we are now, we are likely to just get worse and worse and worse?
In order to answer that, let's think about economic participants. We have a lot of people that are economically active somewhere, but the tyranny of measurement tools regard them as non-existent.
Okay.
And therefore, we cannot leverage what they do in order to have economic growth consequences.
Are you referring to informal traders, for example?
Informal traders.
Yeah.
They form a crucial part of the distribution network for goods and services. Some of them, in fact, manufacturing fantastic goods and services. But because of inefficiencies in processes of finding, processing down a value chain, reaching a final consumer, we are then missing out on an opportunity for growth. I'll make an example. A friend of mine was starting a fashion and manufacturing incubator. And I sat in interviews in Gqeberha helping him. We met brilliant shoemakers, brilliant furniture makers, brilliant interior designers who manufactured things.
Jeez.
The only thing that precludes them from being multimillionaires from what they do is not because they lack product
Or talent.
Yeah. It's because they operate on the fringes of an economy that disrespects them. That would go and import poor quality designs from elsewhere than say, you designed this. I'm a national distributor who's got an African footprint. Quit your job, do this full time. You've got an entire market.
Yes.
So there is a business and an economic imperative for inclusion.
Yeah.
Whereas South African capital still is comfortable thinking it's just a political imperative. So we are inefficient. And I've proposed a book concept on this. We are inefficient in handling the output that comes from our own country.
Yeah.
And we are importing things that are being made here
that are available.
Are top quality products.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very rare that you're going to have the drip, Batu, the Makhosa,
Tepo gene maker, whatever. Yes.
You know? So those stories are showing that there's talent in South Africa, both in creative industries, your own sector,
everywhere.
You know, where we could export top quality, cultural, creative, and other industries. I mean, who would have known it that an American film would wear Makhosa brand? You know, we can do it.
Yeah.
And in fact, David, we've gotten to a time where we have to look inward and look at what's our next goal in order for us to export something that's unique and African to the rest of the world. And I like the story, the Rolls-Royce partnership, Mahlangu.
Yes.
Yeah, Esther Mahlangu. Yeah.
Yes.
So how many more things
can we do?
We have as our sense of selves. The challenge with apartheid mentality is that it taught us that everything that we need is everywhere else but within. You've got an exporting Bondoland weed industry. Okay, it's informal, right?
But it can be formalized.
It can.
Yeah.
When we get an opportunity to formalize it, guess what do? We go call the Chinese.
And we ask them to sort it out.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
That means we have internalized racism that says, no, if it's going to be a solution, it's not going to come from David.
Let's call somebody else to
You know what
it.
I mean? So that's our problem. I think that a healing process of respecting ourselves and approaching ourselves from a value point of view. Decoloniality is not just a political idea. It's a spiritual idea. It's a restoring of our humaneness and dignity and our value.
That's true.
I am working on an article that was looking at political institution building from a Xhosa proverbs. And when I look at these proverbs, I'm like, wow, why do we have this sense that knowledge in its communal setting is substandard unless there's been a philosopher in inverted commas who then privatizes that knowledge in a PhD study or in a research paper.
Yeah.
And that only then does it become respectable. So, for example, one of the sayings is, akukho qili linokuzikhothwa umhlana.
Okay.
There's no qili, I don't know what a qili is, that can scratch its own back.
Okay.
And the underlying philosophy here is interdependence.
Yes. And that you can't do things alone, essentially.
Imagine that as a theory of political institutions.
Yeah.
As a leadership behavior, a theory of leadership behavior.
You realize that it translates to coalition government, in essence.
Exactly.
Yeah. It translates also to two small businesses working together to create something much bigger.
You see what you've just done with it.
Yeah.
And it comes from when we say, no, let the 21st, if we're saying let the 21st century be an Africa 21st century,
yeah,
then let's look within and extract the value and offer it to the rest of the world. Maybe vibranium is our...
Maybe we'll find it.
Maybe vibranium is our way of thinking about things.
But clearly, it means apartheid and colonialism has been very successful.
Yes.
More successful than we can even imagine.
Absolutely. I'm a strong believer myself, and a Christian, but I know that the first wave of Christianity demonized some things that needed not to be demonized, some value.
Yeah.
And I think that as Africans nowadays, it's up to us to say, actually, that aspect has got not only a value from a human relations point of view, but it also has commercial value. And there are many of those things.
I can only imagine. It paints a bleak picture because there are no efforts of achieving that goal.
Yeah.
Of collaboration, of enhancing Batu to become a global brand. There are no efforts. And I say this because when I was writing my MBA thesis was about communication being a solution to unemployment. That's the question I was asking.
Wow.
And I said, and my research required me to interview government communicators.
Sure.
Essentially finding out whether they have within their departments any strategies in place that is aware of unemployment.
Sure.
And I found zero.
Wow.
Now, not a single one of the government departments. I spoke to almost all of them. Not a single one. And maybe 2 municipalities. I spoke to a premier. You can imagine. And there was no effort in communication to try to solve that, because through communication, you're able to tell people there are those opportunities around there. And if they don't know, they won't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But within government, there are no efforts to try to communicate to South Africans about solutions to their unemployment. And that almost says, well, there are no government departments right now that are actively trying to solve unemployment.
But there are efforts to talk about liberation heritage.
Yes.
Because that's the history that matters to Botamkhulu.
Ish.
Not that we should
It brings us
down,
back to that.
Not that we should look down on the roles they played.
Yeah.
But now we need empowering and developing kind of communication.
Essentially, both can exist, can coexist.
Absolutely, indeed.
Yeah, you can walk and chew at the same
there's
time.
Value, yes, indeed. There's value for us in that heritage because part of the development is, in fact, telling those stories.
Yeah.
We still have to tell a lot of our stories. How does it happen that the stories that have had the most success globally have been told by American companies in the creative sector coming here to tell our stories, as opposed to us telling those stories and exporting them?
Wow. Our journey is still long, it seems.
Absolutely.
And we're happy to have people like yourselves who analyze this, look at it from a perspective of an academic who says, maybe there's another way of looking at things. Because my biggest worry about South Africans is apathy, is where we get to a point where we do absolutely nothing. And some call it the Stockholm syndrome, where we fall in love with our capturers.
Yeah.
Because we almost get to a point where ANC can do no wrong.
Yes.
Even if they do wrong, would rather not vote than vote them out of power. And I worry that that's where South Africans over time will end up becoming. And I say people like yourselves, and we're lucky we have a country where we can have a conversation like this and criticize a sitting government and still have our jobs tomorrow and not run the risk of being arrested tomorrow. And I guess in those opportunities, we still have something to salvage of South Africa.
Yeah.
What are your concluding words when it comes to the nature and the politics of South Africa?
The 1994 deal is not working.
Okay.
We take from it the commitment to democracy and a common nationhood. It takes more than lip service to make sure that bears a meaningful experience. And I think that there's a call for us today to make sure that we give meaning to the choice made to democratize and to create an anti-apartheid economy or political economy and give it meaning. Unless we take it, we are going to create a situation where we go down the route of Mexico, where people find their ways of hijacking the economy and fashioning it in their own image.
And that's the worst scenario.
Yeah.
No one wants that.
Absolutely.
Where we have created a parallel system to the existing legal system.
Yeah.
Because that's easy to do that.
Indeed.
And the more we carry on with this, crime and corruption becomes natural and normal.
Yeah.
There was a protest where people were saying the guys who sell AMA license buy to Ramanj.
Yes. Yes.
So once we get to that, then we are in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. And by the way, that is also within the construction space, the mining space, the coal, and we are late already to do something about that.
South Africans will always blame government for anything wrong that's happening in their lives. So I was saying this when we had these crazy rains. I said, South Africans are this close to saying Ramaphosa is causing rain that never stops. We're very quick to blame the government and the sitting government and the president.
Yes.
Are South Africans not really aware and conscious of the role they should be playing in the challenges that we are facing?
Yeah, we have to take responsibility. We have to recognize that you cannot have an accountable and an ethical state without an accountable and ethical society. It's us who harbor our siblings and cousins, whom we know are getting monies they don't need, they don't deserve to have, but we keep quiet about it.
And yet we expect things to work out.
And we expect things to work out. It starts at the level of, the same way that feminists critique us as men for, befriending. And anyway, nobody needs to be ostracized. But being quiet with people that are abusers and all of those things. And we don't call them out. But we are quick to want to organize, mass-based action when we can't take action individually.
Against a boyfriend or a husband, a brother or a sister. And yet when there's a march, we are in front. I appreciate your time. I think we'll continue to dissect South Africa as an interesting part of the world, because I always look at it as a country that had amazing opportunities. And some of them we may have lost forever. And that for me is very sad. I used to love national roads. Sometimes I get frustrated when I drive on them because they're no longer as great as they were. And I hate saying that apartheid was better. It's the worst statement to ever say because there's no way that statement should make sense. But when you see moments of corners of things and you say, this worked much better during apartheid.
It's humiliating. It's humiliating, and it must continue to humiliate us until it becomes unbearable so that we can
do
take
something
action
about it.
Yeah.
I was saying, Utatu Mandela, load shedding agayaz. He doesnn't know it.
Except that the reality of his rural life was permanent load shedding.
Well, that's true, but in
urban centers,
in the urban format where when he lived in Houghton, he passed on before load shedding became a reality that we exist in South Africa. And yet I think we know what to do about load shedding. For some reason, we just don't do it.
We act in bad faith. That's
we act in bad faith.
People present to the public one thing, when in fact what they are about is another agenda. That's sad. On that note, you're the man. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's Ongama Mtimka. I always call him on the radio to talk about these. I'm glad you came to our studio today. Thank you very much. Only a pleasure. Happy to have been here.
Let's break down South Africa's challenges, make sense of them, and actually change in our little corners, because I truly believe the real change starts with us in our small little corners. Whatever contribution you make in your corner, you'll be surprised how far it goes. Is there a chance for an independent to ever win South African elections? Completely from nowhere, this guy just became and rose and slowly built this momentum, which is essentially what Moose is doing. Is there a chance for someone like that to ever end up in the Mtlamandlovu?
You might be talking to one.
That's you. We leave it there. Thank you again.
King David Studio Podcast.